A show created by the fans, for the fans. We are your home for Ohio State football coverage all year long. The Scarlet and Gray Podcast, a Network 216 production. Live weekdays on the Network 216 YouTube channel. Send us all your questions and comments on Twitter at @VSG_podcast. Now, here are your hosts, Tyler Johnson, Jordan Dalton, and Nick Leisure.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's episode of the Scarlet and Gray Podcast. I am Tyler Johnson. This evening, joined once again by Mr. Jordan Dalton. JD, how you doing this evening, my friend?
Not too bad. I'm excited to get back at it. We haven't been on for a couple weeks. And then it's another Big Ten preview. So learning about a team we're not going to see on the field this year, but they are in our conference, and we don't really follow them. So we're excited to learn a little bit about this team.
No, same here, man. Yeah, I'm very excited. I love learning about, even though we don't play some of these teams, it's always cool to learn more about them, especially ones that, they might have struggled in the past a little bit in the Big Ten, but kind of a little bit on the up and up, especially with just good coaching in general. So before we get started, of course, guys, as a reminder, if you're excited for this episode, drop a like on the video. Again, we are on the push for 3,000 subscribers here before, hopefully, this coming football season. So we ask you just drop a like on that video. Subscribe if you are brand new to the channel. Really helps the channel grow. We really appreciate that support. We also have already had all kinds of Big Ten previews. We've talked about Oregon, Washington, UCLA, Rutgers. So make sure you guys check out all of those if you haven't done so already. Before we get to our guest to talk about some Illinois Fighting Illini football, as always, the Scarlet and Gray Podcast is proud to be a partner of Homage Athletic Apparel. If you're a brand new customer on Homage.com, you can get 15% off your first order. All you have to do is type in your email address, subscribe to their emails, and you get 15% off your first order. They have just released some awesome starter jackets once again. So for your favorite NFL teams, make sure you go check them out. Homage.com, they have the gear for all your favorite teams. As you can see here, supporting Team USA, they have it all. That's Homage.com. And we are joined this evening from the Illinicast to talk some Illinois football. We are joined by Mr. Austin Burklund. Austin, how are you doing this evening?
Doing well. How about you guys?
Not too bad. Not too bad. Again, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us this evening and teaching us about a team that a lot of Buckeye fans, aren't really familiar with Illinois as much as we used to be. So, again, we really appreciate your time. I'm going to go ahead and get started because we're going to talk NFL draft here in a little bit later in the show. But wanted to ask about Illinois specifically. Illinois lost a lot of talent this offseason. I mean, talk about Johnny Newton, who one of the best defensive tackles in the country. But also you lose your best playmaker on offense in Isaiah Williams. Who ultimately do you think is going to be the biggest loss for Illinois for this year?
I think it's got to be Isaiah Williams or Johnny Newton. I think Johnny Newton is a little bit more important of a loss because the defense that Illinois is bringing in this upcoming season is pretty weak. You're going to need a great pass rush right now because the secondary of that Illini already started out weak to enter the offseason. Then you lose Zachary Tobia, transfer to Georgia Tech this past week. So I really think that defensive line is ultra important. And you also lose Keith Randolph. Part of the law firm is what they call it here in Champaign of Newton and Randolph. And you lost the law firm. So now you're starting from scratch, kind of from this defensive line's perspective, dealing with a lot of transfers coming in. We have a seventh-year transfer. Can't believe that's even a thing in college football, in a Florida State transfer defensive lineman. And then we have Sledge coming in from Auburn. So it's going to be a reworked defensive line, reworked secondary with a lot of youth pieces. And it's just a little dangerous to think of all the teams that can score in bunches on this schedule, including the likes of Michigan, the likes of Oregon, and a non-conference team in Kansas who had their way with Illinois this past season.
And you go back to the quarterback situation here. So Luke Altmaier is coming back. Nearly 2,000 yards passing this past year, 13 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. Obviously isn't great. They have John Paddock as well. Who do you think is going to be the starting quarterback this year? Again, neither quarterback really like this. It seemed like, just based off looking at the stats here, really lit the world on fire. How do you think the quarterback situation will pan out this year?
Yeah, Paddock went to the Atlanta Falcons as an undrafted free agent signing. Afterwards, he was a late starter this past season, took over for Luke Altmaier whenever he was injured. Luke Altmaier seemingly healthy toward the end of the year for that Iowa game and that Northwestern game, which I think Brett Bielema kind of screwed up. I think he should have added Luke Altmaier back onto the roster of at least starter, because you needed some legs to counteract the punch of the Northwestern and Iowa defensive fronts. And Luke had some decent moments, including a Minnesota game where he really torched the Gopher defense. But the problem is Barry Lenny's offense was 5-step dropbacks, slow pace, got sacked a lot, 34 sacks on the season. That's a lot of sacks to give up. The offensive line wasn't gelled pretty well in the early onset of the season. And once Barry Lenny kind of adjusted things to a more up-tempo, quick hitch offense to Isaiah Williams and Casey Washington, then things kind of changed into Luke Altmaier's favor. So that's kind of where Illinois is going to be at, is some quick hitch routes, nullify the weaknesses of the offensive line, and really take advantage of some of the speedier threats that Illinois will have at wide receiver.
Awesome.
And JD, I know you had some questions, of course, on Brett Bielema, who very experienced Big Ten coach.
Yeah, so Brett Bielema came in after Lovie Smith, and he has already surpassed his win total in about 20 less games. What is the outlook on Brett there in Champaign? And do you foresee any changes as a head coach, or do you think his job is pretty secure?
I think his next step is to really look at the Illinois defensive coordinator. Aaron Henry was a Wisconsin player under Brett Bielema, was hired to be the defensive coordinator after Ryan Walters was hired on as the head coach of the Purdue Boilermakers. Then the defense really took a downturn last year. So I think Brett will be allowed one more defensive coordinator change before he's going to be on the hot seat. He's done a great job of developing certain players, like Devin Witherspoon was a 0-star Lovie Smith recruit, developed him as to the number 5 overall pick in the NFL draft. That's pretty great development. Yeah. The problem is that in today's world of college football, development is harder and harder to accomplish, because if a guy sits for a couple of years, he's going to be looking for that next step where he can possibly start, instead of maintaining the process or trusting the process and being a starter as a senior. So I think that's going to be the major struggle for Brett Bielema in today's world of college football compared to years past. He hasn't used the transfer portal to the best of his ability. I think he trusted his team from a couple years ago into last year a little bit too much, didn't have that influx of talent, brought in a lot of JUCO players, and really his only big addition was Luke Altmaier at the quarterback position. So I think that's going to be his huge challenge, is to figure out the transfer portal, both maintaining players to stay in and making and bringing in new players as well. So I think that's kind of where it's at the moment.
Would you say that you guys are losing a lot of players to the transfer portal, or does it seem like you're not as affected? Because like at Ohio State, we have such a top-heavy recruitment to begin with. So when we lose players to the portal, we're losing 4 stars, 5 stars that we, didn't even get to see on the field.
There aren't a lot of guys that are going to make immediate impacts this next year in the transfer portal, but one perception guy that was a really big loss happened actually this past week in Andrew Dennis, the offensive lineman. He was Illinois' 26th highest recruit all time in the recruiting era rankings that Illinois has ever got. He never even played a snap because he transferred in. He didn't transfer in. He was brought in for that spring semester, and now it's gone after just one semester on campus, most likely to go back closer to home in the state of Michigan. So that is kind of where Illinois is at right now in terms of losing players, but that one definitely hurt in terms of building foundational pieces for the future of that offensive line.
And going into this year, Austin, who are some players, really, if Buckeye fans always check around the Big Ten, they want to see how every other team is doing, of course, who is the biggest competition to them this year. But in general, who are just some players on Illinois that Buckeye fans should maybe keep an eye out for making noise in the Big Ten this year?
I really love Caden Fagan. He is the running back for the Illini team. He is a small school guy, was a 1A high school player, and was a 4-star, which is pretty nuts to hear from a small school guy. He had 95 carries, 438 yards, had a little bit of injury this past season, but he is going to be the workhorse running back. And we all know Brett Bielema and his history with Wisconsin and how their running backs are just so great. So I think the running game of the offensive line will be okay. And I think Caden Fagan will be a great piece there. A guy that didn't make too much of an impact is Malik Elzy. He was a 4-star wide receiver out of Chicago Simeon. And I think he is going to be a foundational piece for this Illini offense. He's going to be Luke Altmaier's number one target. And with his athleticism and him figuring out the playbook, finally, I think the game will slow down and he'll be allowed to use that athleticism to his advantage instead of just thinking like a freshman at all times. So offensively, those are the names that that Ohio State fans should look out for, just in terms of Big Ten entertainment value, because I don't think we're going to be at the same level per se. I don't think we'll be fighting for the Illibuck in Indianapolis.
And the final thing I love to ask, just those that come in and tell us about their teams, I always want to ask your expectations for this year for Illinois, and ultimately, what do you think their final record ends up being?
I think Illinois will hover around 4 to 6 wins this year, depending on what transpires. We have a semi-easy non-conference slate with EIU and Central Michigan on the schedule. We have a tough home game against Kansas, so we'll see what Lance Leipold has to bring to Champaign after last year's great success of that Jayhawk program. Then in the Big Ten, it gets a little dicey with going to Nebraska and Penn State, but then we have a home game against Purdue, which will help out a lot. Plus, we end the season with Rutgers and Northwestern. So that's kind of the stretch. This is actually a 4-game stretch. Minnesota, Michigan State, Rutgers, and Northwestern. I think that's going to decide the season if Illinois is going to be a bowl team or not. So if Illinois can steal one in Champaign from Michigan State, we've beat PJ Fleck every single year of the Brett Bielema era, which is a great feather in the cap of Illinois, beating that used car salesman. And then Rutgers and Northwestern at the end of the year. Those games are going to be very, very tight. Rutgers is a program that's building pretty well with Greg Schiano, and then Northwestern, surprise team with their interim head coach. We'll see what he can do with a multiple year helm at Northwestern.
Yeah, well, Austin, we really do appreciate, obviously, you joining us this evening. If you could just let everyone know just where they can find all your content that covers Illinois.
Absolutely. You can find my dramatic tweets at AB1132, and then you can find all things Illini at Illinicast on Twitter and on YouTube. So just search us out. If Illinois and Ohio State, especially in basketball, are battling for a recruit, we'll be covering all of that for the Illinicast. And then in the football side of things, we'll be covering it all after every game and before every game. So check us out there.
Awesome. Austin, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Guys.
We really appreciate your time.
Best of luck getting to 3,000.
Thanks so much. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Austin Burklund, Illinicast. A lot of great information on Illinois football. JD, the fact Illinois was able to get this is going back a little ways, but the fact Illinois got a coach like Brett Bielema to come coach Illinois, I think is just – and again, we don't talk about this because Illinois is not our team, but the fact that they got him to come back to college football after being in the NFL, I think that's a great pull for them. And, I think Austin makes a good point. If you don't use the transfer portal in this era of college football, you're going to get left behind. And right now, it seems like that's what's happening with Illinois.
Yeah, I think he when he got hired, we had kind of speculated that he was going to turn this team into kind of like the Wisconsin run heavy team. But I don't think they can really get the recruits, especially the offensive line recruits, to kind of sustain that strategy. So it looks like it's been some tough treading last couple of years. He has one winning season in his first 3 years at Illinois. But like I said, he has more wins than Lovie Smith did and about 20 less games. And I don't really know what their benchmark is for him, because if they come in and they tell him, hey, we want you to win the Big Ten title in 5 years, I don't know if that's a reasonable expectation. But I think he's doing the best he can do with what he's given. But Illinois, I would love to see Illinois kind of return back to their glory days, because they are a good historic franchise in the Big Ten, kind of like Nebraska of old. But it's just been rough for a while since their Rashard Mendenhall days. Really, they haven't had a solid team there in Champaign. But they do every couple of years they'll have a guy come into the draft and they usually go pretty high. So they usually have one or two guys that are solid NFL players.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And don't bring up Mendenhall, because that's just bad flashbacks to when they came into the shoe. But anyway, I mean, you talk about Johnny Newton. Johnny Newton is a great prospect for Illinois. He mentioned Devin Witherspoon, who was one of the top rookies last year in the NFL. So it's kind of crazy, because they don't bring in a lot of like talent that sustains them to winning seasons. But you're right. They always have a couple guys that seem to sneak into the NFL and end up being impact players. So, yeah, definitely interesting to see what Illinois does this year. But as we're wrapping up the second half of the show, the NFL draft, of course, took place. So we had some Buckeyes get drafted. Not that many, mainly because everyone came back for the most part, if we're being honest. First off, the one I think we all pretty much expected to happen did. Marvin Harrison Jr. to the Cardinals. I mean, honestly, that was I felt like that was a no-brainer as soon as the Cardinals had the fourth pick, because it just seemed like that's just the way this was going to go. Yeah. Marvin's going to be from day one a top wide receiver in the NFL. I mean, what are your thoughts on his landing spot with the Cardinals?
It's the perfect fit, especially because they don't have Hollywood Brown. They don't have any wide receiver ones there that would be competing for snaps. He's going to line up on the outside. He's going to open up that offense for Kyler Murray, which is going to be great. And in Arizona, it seems that they want to stick with Kyler. So I think it will be a good fit. And, playing in Arizona in that dome, it couldn't be better for him just as a wide out.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I love the fit. We know Kyler Murray's going to force feed him the football. I mean, there's not really a lot of targets in Arizona anyway, outside of Marvin Harrison Jr. You got Trey McBride. You have Greg Dulcich. I mean, other than that, though, there's just not a lot there. Now we move on to one that obviously we're psyched about, being Cleveland Browns fans. The Browns did take Ohio State defensive tackle Michael Hall Jr., still only 20 years old. A lot of us were hoping he'd come back, but circumstances of having a new kid, it made a lot of sense for him to go to the NFL. Gets drafted in the second round, which is great for him. Honestly, I mean, I said this. You couldn't find a better fit for him. He's going to a place where he doesn't have to start right away. He's going to learn from a lot of veterans, including the NFL Defensive Player of the Year. He's learning from one of the best defensive coordinators in the NFL. And again, he's only 20 years old. What are your thoughts about him landing with the Browns?
Yeah, the 20 years old thing was I didn't realize how young he was. And so that was the first thing that popped off to me. It was like, man, he's 20 years old, really athletic. I think the size was kind of the biggest red flag with him, as he's kind of on the smaller side for a defensive tackle, but just his athleticism. And like you said, he's not going to have to be a world beater on day one. He's going to have that room that he can work in with, kind of similar to Ohio State, where he can come in fresh, make a couple of splash plays, come out, get a breather, and the defense won't skip a beat. So I think it's a great fit for the Browns. And it's also just a great fit for him personally. I mean, he's from Cleveland, grew up in Cleveland, went to Streetsboro. So yeah, I think he's stoked. I think Browns fans are stoked. I think Buckeyes fans are stoked, and it just couldn't be a better situation.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And next is one that, don't get me wrong, I'm happy that it worked out for him. It's a bummer that he went to one of the top teams in the AFC that our Browns are going to be competing with now for years to come. Cade Stover, tight end Cade Stover reunites with CJ Stroud in Houston. Listen, man, don't get me wrong. I'm happy for Cade. I really am. But the fact that duo is going to be together in Houston, that is just bad news for the rest of the AFC. But, yeah. I mean, Cade goes into truly – I hate that we're saying this because it seems like it's very common right now. These three all have ended up in just perfect situations. Cade now is reunited with CJ Stroud, who, of course, was one of CJ's favorite targets at Ohio State. That's really what got Cade's career going, I would say, as a Buckeye, was playing with CJ Stroud. I mean, what are your thoughts with Farmer Gronk landing in Houston?
Yeah, it hurts me as a Browns fan, but just looking at it on paper, looking at it with reuniting with CJ, he gets to go. He doesn't have – he's the same situation as Michael Hall Jr. He's not going to be the number one tight end. He'll be behind Dalton Schultz, who's been phenomenal in Houston last year. And he'll get to, learn behind him. I'm imagining they're going to be running a lot of 2 tight end sets. Their offense is going to be just disgusting with Stephon Diggs and everything else that they've added to that offense, Joe Mixon. So, good fit for him. I'm sure he's just over the moon that he's going to one of his former roommates, CJ Stroud, and they're teaming up in Houston. I think they are just super stoked that they get to work together.
Yeah, absolutely. No doubt. And again, wishing he succeeds, of course. Again, just a bummer he had to go to Houston of all teams. But now rounding things out with the last Buckeye that was drafted, and then we'll talk about who our biggest surprise was that wasn't drafted. Tommy Eichenberg goes to the Las Vegas Raiders. I'll be honest, this is not a knock against Tommy. I didn't really expect or know if he would get drafted. So that one was a little bit of a surprise to me. Maybe so the fact he went in the 5th round, I think, is what surprised me a little bit. But the Raiders, of course, are going to get a guy that's a leader. He's going to play through any type of injury that exists to him. One of the toughest players that Ohio State's ever had. But I think it's a good fit for the Raiders. I mean, you look at they have Robert Spillane, Divine DeBallo, and Luke Masterson. So, I mean, they are weak at linebacker. I think it's a really good opportunity for him to come in and get a role early on, because I think he can do that because, again, their linebacking core isn't really anything like super special, I would say. I mean, just looking at it on paper, I mean, it looks like he will be behind Robert Spillane, but he only had 82 tackles last year. So I think Tommy can go in with Las Vegas, and I think and Luke Masterson didn't do much for them at all last year. I think Tommy Eichenberg can come into Las Vegas and earn a role early on. What are your thoughts about him landing in Vegas?
I mean, he's tackling machine. He's an old school linebacker. I know Antonio Pierce is trying to change that culture there in Las Vegas, and he wants it to be the old Oakland Raiders. He wants that mentality in that building. So I think bringing in a guy like Tommy who's can play that middle linebacker spot and really isn't afraid to stick his head in the run game and make tackles. I think that's what they were looking for in a linebacker, and the fact that he was there in the 5th round, I think it just made sense for them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Agreed. And I do think he will get an opportunity to earn an early role there because, again, the Raiders really they're pretty weak at linebacker, but to be fair, they have a pretty nice defensive line. now undrafted free agents. Who is the biggest surprise to you that you thought almost could have or should have been drafted? I think for me, I'm shocked in a way Xavier Johnson didn't get drafted because he brings that Swiss Army type of mentality. There's a variety of roles he can play for a team, not only as a return man, he can catch passes out of the backfield. He's a good slot guy. Like, there's just a lot he can do, a lot of different roles he can play. And I figured with the new kickoff, that's a guy that teams might look at in the sixth or seventh round and be like, okay, you know what? There's something here. We can use him in a variety of ways. He should get drafted. That's the one that really stuck out for me. Was there one that really stuck out for you?
Where did Xavier Johnson end up getting? He got signed, right? Buffalo. That's a good fit.
It is. I wish it was Cleveland, but yeah.
For me, it was Josh Proctor. I didn't expect him to go high, but maybe like 6th or 7th round pick. But I think he'll actually have a role in Jacksonville. So I think that would be a good fit. Steel Chambers as well, just because of his athleticism. I thought that he would get a look later on, but he got signed by Detroit, and I think he could also have a role there. But who knows? Every team brings in about 100 players for camp, and those rosters are cut in half by the beginning of the season. So I'm sure we'll get some news out of training camps if one of these players is doing well and looking like they're going to make a team. So we'll see.
I think Xavier Johnson probably has the best chance because I just think Buffalo is so decimated. I mean, you added Keon Coleman, but I mean, outside of that, I mean, you have Khalil Shakir, Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox. Those are tight ends, but Kincaid's mainly used as a receiver, I would say, out of the slot. So I think Xavier's got a good chance to make it. Mayan Williams was not drafted, nor was he picked up as a UDFA. Does that surprise you at all?
Who was that? Sorry.
Mayan Williams was not picked up.
Oh no, we talked about this morning. I'm not super surprised. If we would have been talking about this last year, if he would have declared for the draft, I would be surprised. I would be really surprised. But with the injuries, it looked like he kind of lost the burst. His top end speed just wasn't there. I don't know if he ended up running a 40, but I can't imagine it was fast if he did. So I'm not shocked. I think he will eventually get an opportunity, but it's not shocking.
I think the big thing, kind of like I talked about this morning, like in our group chat, is that I don't think he should have left for one. Also, you're injured. Why are you declaring for the draft when you're still not fully healthy? He wasn't working out. Like, I don't know, man. I don't understand that. Maybe there's more to it than what we know. I don't know, and I'm not here to judge like him declaring. I just think if you enter the transfer portal, that's more of your best bet. If you weren't going to stay at Ohio State, he could have entered the portal and gone somewhere. I mean, there's no doubt he could have gone somewhere.
He had one more year.
So if I look at, I'll pull it up real quick. Maybe he couldn't have, but I think I'm pretty sure with Mayan. Mayan was a senior, but keep in mind, if you can use you could be a graduate like and use a 5th year that way. I mean, plenty of guys do it. So, I mean, I was a little surprised. That's just me though. Wish him all the best. Honestly, I even if he doesn't get an opportunity in the NFL, give him an opportunity in the UFL. I think that would be great as far as really showing teams what he can do, and that might not be a bad springboard to get him into the NFL. So
that's why it's there.
Yep, exactly.
I think we're going to see a lot of these players that don't make, especially this rookie class, if they don't make a team, you're going to see a lot of them in the UFL next year.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I agree with that. And again, we wish him all the best for sure. No doubt. As we're wrapping things up, JD, is there anything else you want to add, man?
I don't think so. I know we're kind of on the summer break, getting ready to not really talk any football for a couple months until late July, right?
We'll find like a couple things. We'll obviously try and finish our season previews. We'll depending on what news, because you never know. I mean, with recruiting or not, so we'll see what happens there. But also, like we did last year, we'll do them live, probably just our position group previews.
Also,
talk about those will be short though. Those won't take half hour or whatnot. But
Josh McDaniels,
yeah, there's a rumor. Well, yeah. We'll see if that happens or not. We'll see. But as we're wrapping things up, we really appreciate everyone that tuned into tonight's episode. A special thanks to Austin Burklund for joining us to talk Illinois football again. It's always awesome learning about some of these programs that a lot of us as Buckeye fans are just not really familiar with as much, just because we don't, let's be honest, we don't really watch them outside of when they play Ohio State. So, again, special thank you to him. So be sure to check out the Illini podcast. The Illinicast, my apologies, is what it's called, for any information on Illinois basketball, Illinois football. Make sure you check them out. Also, drop a like on tonight's video if you really enjoyed the content. We would appreciate that. What that does, don't get me wrong, we love the subscriptions and we ask for those all the time. But what the likes do is that really pushes the content out to audiences that have not yet seen the Scarlet and Gray podcast. So again, drop a like on that video if you guys would. We really would appreciate that. We will talk to you guys all again soon. As always, go Buckeyes.